Chris Moeller. I've got Tim Nichols with me today. Tim is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at ADL Ventures. Tim, hello.
Chris, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great. So where are you, Tim? Tell the world where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm in sunny Vienna, Austria. So I've moved here with my family. My wife is Austrian from Vienna, so we moved here to be closer to her family for a little while, but work in the US. So obviously met you in North Carolina at a meeting to try to address some of the Helene catastrophe with the housing solution, but generally my focus is on housing construction industry and trying to figure out how to support the U.S. in transitioning to a more kind of industrialized approach to that area of work.
Yeah, and I so appreciate having met you because, as you know, moving out of the office industry and still focusing on commercial real estate, trying to find innovative approaches to new assets, running across industrialized offsite construction, knowing that we have a deficit in skilled trades, looking at resilience as a construction methodology and passive house design. Super excited to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, I think that what you've just brought up is actually one of the things that is, I think it's reported on or discussed, but it's not as discussed as much. The housing crisis, the lack of housing, because the demand is there, but there's not enough supply and they can't build fast enough. And part of the reason they can't build fast enough is because they don't necessarily have the labor that they need. Kids aren't going into the construction industry, and so they're aging out kind of senior journeymen, which is a challenge to kind of get that level and skill back up to where it needs to get to. And that's, one of the ways in which to address that is to open up the pool. And it's a physically intense job. So if you can make it simpler by putting it into a manufacturing setting, then that's another way in which you could actually expand the number of people that can actually join. Lots of women work in housing manufacturing facilities that attracts a broader kind of group. And so if you could spread the kind of make it easier to build these homes, that's one way in which you can kind of support this challenge that they're starting to face. And ideally build the next generation of kind of construction workers in a manufacturing setting. You couple that with robotics technology and kind of the kind of next generation of worker, then you could really start to make it, not so destructive on the human body as well.
Let's talk about the naysayers of the industry because I think it'll just tackle this head on. People are saying this has been around for 20 years, right? 30 years. This industrialized offsite construction, more companies have gone out of business that are stayed in business. Let's first talk about the difference between modular construction and mobile homes, right? Maybe we'll split that up.
And we'll do homes
versus modular first, and then let's dispel some myths.
That sounds good. So I'd be interested to hear what you've kind of learned on this. I'll give you mine, and I'd love to hear how you kind of like in your research, because I've been in it for about 5 years, and I was working in kind of full volumetric modular housing. So that's a 6-sided box that gets put on the back of a truck and shipped out to the site and stacked up like Legos. It was strictly wood frame, multifamily housing. That was Factory OS out in Vallejo, California, just north of San Francisco there. And, that's one approach. And one approach to what's called full volumetric modular construction. Others take an approach that focuses on just building out wall panels or bathroom pods and building these components or pieces of the building off-site and shipping them to the site or shipping them to a manufacturing facility to put them together like an iPhone. I mean, you're kind of trying to build out a supply chain in that regard. And that's a more kind of modern approach that focuses on quality housing that's going to be going up in these cities or urban areas generally, versus, what I think is traditionally known as HUD homes or manufactured housing, which has been around for a long time and has created some really interesting industry players. I think Champion is one, Clayton is one, and they're big players out there, and they're doing a lot of good things in terms of like ensuring that there's a constant supply of homes, but the quality isn't there. And the legislation to kind of support the development of a tax base through building those homes is also not there. So there's kind of these competing priorities on how we actually build the right, or how we redesign policy to support modular construction in its kind of new iteration. And I would actually argue that, that it has been around longer than 30 years. It's actually, been around much longer than that. The Arch was a modular project, if you want to look at it that way. And that's like a beautiful kind of sign of a way in which you can kind of use modular construction to build something kind of huge and creative and kind of get a lot of people together to kind of showcase that. But at the same time, Panasonic is one of the leading home builders in Japan, and they have they've been doing it since the 60s, and they are a manufacturing giant there, and they've been building modular housing for that long, and they've only continued to refine the process. There are huge modular manufacturers in Germany and Sweden. Here in Austria, there's a great one called Gropius that I've been in contact with, and they're trying to come to the US. So some of it is like, part of it is that the US had a much broader landscape to play with, and multifamily wasn't as popular, and the industry doesn't have a lot of incentive to change. Some of it is that new technology is coming along and it's making it easier to get these types of manufacturing facilities off the ground. And some of it is just the things that we talk about. We need houses faster. We need houses to be high quality. We need homes to be able to be delivered to site. And we've kind of discovered that there's a labor gap that needs to be filled, and this is a way to do it. So, there's a couple of different things that are just starting to kind of feed into the growth that I see happening across the US around this industry.
Yeah, so let's double click on that for a little bit because I don't think we created any. Let's give the readers or the listeners or
That
all
would be great.
a little bit
Yeah.
what ADL Ventures does.
So ADL specifically focuses on kind of three legacy industries. We focus on construction and buildings, which we've kind of gone into, and we do that primarily through industrialized construction. We focus on energy companies. How do you actually create new ways of developing energy? And then we also focus on transportation. And all of them are with the kind of lens of decarbonization in these three legacy industries. And we do that by partnering with government and corporations to develop ventures that are going to support their process of reaching, of changing the way that they're doing the business, because sometimes they need to figure out a way to do things, but they don't always have the resources. And we have connections to a variety of different venture growth systems that we're trying to implement to support them in their transition towards decarbonizing some of the work that they're doing. My specific focus, because of my background in industrialized construction, is with the buildings team, and that's what I've been focusing on. I came to North Carolina via Raleigh, to be honest, because there's a great group there at the city that's trying to figure out how to start using modular construction to do affordable housing, and the Raleigh Housing Authority is interested in it. Jake Levitas, who's at the city, is trying to kind of figure out a way to get this to be more inclusive of the kind of building policy. And there's other cities that are also doing great work, and so that's where I've kind of been focusing my attention. St. Louis has a couple of great projects. They've got a RFP out to try to build a modular prototype that's, I think, 6 to 8 units, and we're working with a group called BuiltWise, which is right in your neck of the woods. They're a South Carolina company, but the founders are actually from St. Louis, which is where I'm from. I should kind of highlight, which is how we kind of got connected as well, which is nice, and probably why I immediately referenced the Arch, because I think it's such a great story as well. And then, Gateway South is a great development happening just south of the Arch, and it's 100 acres that are focused specifically on how to change the construction industry and how to actually start to design buildings for more modular construction as well, and have this kind of innovation space for that.
Awesome. That's good reframing. So let's talk about WNCIC a little bit, like our meeting that we had, and NC Build or Build NC.
Well, Chris, before I do, I want to kind of get back to, we talked a little bit about modular and manufacturing, and I'd be curious, like, you've jumped into this quite a bit. You seem like somebody that dives in head first, and I'd be very interested to hear what you've found in your research and looking into this world a little bit, because you brought up the naysayers, which I think is a really important thing to do first. It's like you want to get out in front of like if there are a lot of things that have not worked so far, and we have to figure out what's worked and what hasn't to help kind of continue to move the industry forward. And one of our biggest pushes at ADL is that, the incentivization component is the big piece of changing the construction industry. And if you can kind of create a good product that does drive demand for it, and you can aggregate that demand with a city or a region, then you could actually start to shift things a little bit better. But I'd be curious how you've kind of learned about it and what you've seen in terms of like what's working and what's not.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So it was, fairly straightforward what we were working on. I was very interested in the capital stack and how the financing works, how many times the capital stack sort of compounded through the office product. And what I realized was that the future of work was really more like the future of living, the rhetoric around working and everybody working from home. And then me saying, well, if everybody's going to work from home, have we adjusted our homes so that we can work in them? Because we were, fairly detailed in our activity-based design and the type of work that we were doing in ergonomics. And I realized that our homes really weren't set up, so to speak, for work. And then I realized pretty quickly that we had a home shortage, finance problem, we had interest rate issues, all the things that we're facing in residential now. To me, that's my job, is to look for the opportunity, right? Is to see around the corners. And I realized pretty quickly that, the median house price was inflating at a 30% rate almost annually. We're at $450,000 for the median home, single family home in America right now. Meanwhile, our salaries are not keeping up. So all of these things, right? Plus the fact that there's a massive trade deficit right now in terms of skilled labor. I'm looking at all this going, man, there's huge opportunities. And then sure, IOC comes in, right? I'm like, oh, industrialized offsite construction, roboticized processes, our RPA, BIM modeling, like everything that we were talking about in office really translates pretty well to IOC. There's a long way of me saying, that I started realizing that we can turn process to product. And people love products. People hate process. And that's the opportunity I think we see in IOC, is that it turns a process, a very difficult process. Building a home is hard. And, going out into the woods and cobbling together a home is even harder. So like, we don't have to, right? That's what I sort of started learning when I, started poking my head around the industry. That we have structural insulated panels, and we have mods and pods, as you mentioned, that could be completely outfitted, that you can almost drop off with a crane. Where I am now is I see and I understand why there's resistance, because the general contractors are seeing the divisions get cut out, right? So that site selection and site prep is really the majority of their work. And then there's a lot of finish detail. But the middle of that is like, man, we're going to lose out on all those divisions. General contractors work under general conditions and overhead and profit. But what we haven't done is we haven't done a really good enough job educating them that they might be able to do 3 or 4 times or 30% more volume, because with less reliance on individual trades, by starting to incorporate some of these things. And then my introduction with Rob Leonard and App State and sustainability, passive house design, and building envelope and building science, excuse me, how you can achieve better everything through,
exactly,
through all of this quality control. So anyway, a long way of me sort of giving you the last 2 years, but here we are, right? Like face to face, having conversations about the future of living. And I think pathways communities and weaving in some of these social contracts and social responsibility into these communities, along with industrialized offsite construction, is just a beautiful marriage.
Yeah, and I think that if you are able to create a robust supply chain within a region or an area, you can respond. I mean, we met in person because we were talking about this Hurricane Helene recovery process that's happening in Western North Carolina. And the goal was to really highlight the opportunity for supporting the economic redevelopment using industrialized construction to both, ensure jobs are still there or brought back to the region, and build housing quickly. And those two things can be achieved with one approach. And it's not simple, it's not easy, but having something like that in your area or in your region before something like Helene hits, or before the flooding that happened in eastern Kentucky hits, or before the LA fires hits, is only going to allow you to respond more effectively and have a much more resilient ecosystem for addressing these housing issues if you have that kind of like infrastructure in place to do that ahead of time. So, and I think also like it was funny doing so. ADL also manages quite a few government grants to help shift the industry. We've done research for HUD around the financial stack, which I think you highlighted earlier as an interesting piece, and we totally agree. And we wrote up a report for this HUD 6700 report, which is all about how there needs to be a shift in how financing models work for supporting this industry. Run something for the DOE called the Advanced Buildings Collaborative, which crosses the entire country to try to recognize the opportunity of using industrialized construction to decarbonize the housing stock in the US, because buildings are a major contributor of carbon in the nation and around the world. And that's just a great step for us to be taking. And the Department of Energy obviously is trying to figure out ways to tackle climate change through the buildings industry as well. And then this tech hub is really about economic development in the region. And we really kind of had an opportunity, I feel, to just make a change to how we ship the approach of FEMA or the approach of a regional community to a disaster when it hits like this, away from, here are tents and we're kind of going to get to the economic development component later, to look, we've got this whole resilient architecture in place and we're ready to respond as a community to something like this, or a region like this. And we're, still in conversations, and this stuff doesn't happen overnight. I mean, roads need to be built before you can rebuild, before you can just start dropping houses off. But if you can, and I think this kind of blends into what you were saying before, is that the GCs not only recognize that they can be left reliant on trades, but they can double their time. They can cut back on their time by doubling up efforts over the same period of time, right? While they're doing all that site work, all of those houses can be built. And so while the roads are being rebuilt in Western North Carolina, those homes could be like getting constructed so that they're ready to fly in right when this is right happening, and people can stop living in hotels and in tents at a much quicker pace.
Yeah, so that's a phenomenon that I consider to be multiplicative, right? What you're doing is taking advantage of the fact that you've got 24 hours in a day, and there's process that's being made or progress that's being made two places at the same time. And what happens when you do traditional construction is it's additive. There's 27 hours or 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. How do you double your sites? Well, you have something being built offsite while something is being done on site constantly. And that cuts back time, right? So, and that's what's so amazing to me, looking at these fires in LA now, right? Like, there are not enough general contractors. There's not enough supply chain. There's not enough subcontractors to rebuild LA. There's just not. Plus, they have a monumental environmental issue now. Plus, they have a monumental planning and zoning issue now, right? So, just Western North Carolina is unique in that it's rural Appalachia, but a lot of municipalities got their ear to the ground and they're already working through policy change to allow for expedited solutions. I don't think that's going to happen the same way in LA. And that's important. The policy behind industrialized offsite construction, opportunity zones for economic development, what I call pathways overlay districts. I think that there needs to be a discussion around the policy side of things, because people don't know the difference between modular and mobile or manufactured, right? Because there is a difference. And code and compliance, when you get to a job site, if you're not used to seeing it as a code inspector, because it's not written in city zoning, planning, and land use, right? How do you see that playing out? Does it start there, or does it end there? Do you beg for forgiveness or ask for permission?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, every entrepreneurial endeavor or innovation around an industry is going to require some kind of push and pull around the ways in which the past gets addressed and the future gets built, right? And this is not going to be any different with this industry. And what you try to do is you get organizations like the Raleigh Housing Authority, or like the St. Louis Housing Authority, or Cleveland just put out an RFP for a modular construction program. There's an innovation center conversation around modular construction or innovative offsite construction happening for New York City. And if you get some of these larger players to start to shift the industry and start to create demand aggregation, if you start to get them to aggregate demand around specific designs and products that are being focused on affordable housing or just housing products, then the policy is going to have to kind of come along and catch up or be part of the conversation. There's no avoiding that. And the same with like the financial pieces. You can't build homes without a ton of money, so you actually have to like ensure that those financial products are being discussed simultaneously. So there'll be some, I think, kind of push around it, but at the same time, these aren't monumental changes to the code. It's more around just getting the recognition for this new type of building to be kind of pushed forward, and having a city or a region that's open to it to try to figure out what that change looks like.
Yeah, and I think maybe some disaster recovery.
And North Carolina does drive a lot of these, hit a lot of these points. I mean, they're interested in this type of construction. This tech hub is right there, and the research has been done in the region right next to Helene. So they're like an opportunity for us to kind of work with all of the cogs that are in the region to do this kind of stuff as well. And we are, and they're all at the table, and they're all having the conversation as well. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just think that North Carolina is just such a strange, kind of unique confluence of points at this time, right? And I hope that we really can find a way to kind of layer this in pretty concretely for a long-term recovery for that area and that broader region as well. And this stretches not just throughout North Carolina, but it goes all the way up to New York, down to Georgia, as far as Appalachia is concerned. And there's a real opportunity for us to kind of build that out as well.
Yeah, the Appalachian Regional Commission, Arca Rise, the work that Andrew McCoy's doing up at Virginia Tech, the work that Rob Howard's doing and Mike Capper doing at App State, the response
Which
is amazing.
ADL is part of both of those, actually. I mean, just kind of like we're doing everything we can to kind of like be part of everything that's happening, particularly in Appalachia. There just seems to be a lot of great work, and the Just Transition Foundation is really trying to focus on a lot of this kind of work to really support the growth and revitalization of this critical area of our country that is seeing a lot of disparity over the years. And now it's like, all right, well, look, there's a lot of ways in which we can revitalize them, get the housing back, get the jobs back, and just bring the communities back to that region as well.
It's very true. ADL Ventures is everywhere I turn around, right? So I'm working with the QEP, the Quality Enhancement Plan at App State right now, and changing curriculum. They just brought a sustainability gen ed credit. That's fast. They did that really fast. You are required now to take a sustainability course at App State, and that came as a result of some pre-planning, but mostly Helene, right? Like, you have to understand what happened. This was a once in a 1,000-year kind of thing. So they have to change curriculum to talk about that and to teach that. And Rob Howard is lecturing on sustainable design, and he brings a lot of experience as a builder practitioner to the table as well, right? He's been building affordable, attainable, sustainable housing, as he calls it, with Duke Cottages, and it's a huge part of it. Tim, is removing the stigma of affordable housing and removing the stigma of what's a mobile home versus a modular home versus a manufactured home. There's so much education and awareness that needs to be done. And that's why I love what you're doing with buildnc.io, that website, the Tech Innovation Hub. I love the involvement in that. And then response, of course, to disaster recovery. All of these things together make a more resilient solution. We're creating new asset classes inside of real estate.
I totally agree. And I think that if we can manage to get, we've with the EDA grant, I think that the work that we've done so far, which was just around strategy development, has had some great success in just showcasing, what's available in the region, what the opportunity is, and the interest from everybody from a federal to a very, localized region. The people that showed up to that meeting that we had in December to help respond, I mean, we had HUD there, the disaster recovery department, just explaining and highlighting ways in which like money can flow to the region and support the rebuilding efforts. We had the DOE there highlighting how they could support it with members of a group out of Charlotte for the GGRF funds that we want to ensure that are starting to support the ways in which you rebuild, thinking through energy efficiency and thinking through how you decarbonize your housing stock. And then you had local developers like Open Hearts there who are just trying to figure out, like, we've got land, we need a developer, and we want to build using industrialized construction. How do we do this, right? So going from like that broad federal HUD-based approach and kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty of like, this is just a developer that needs to build something on 15 acres and they're ready to go. Or Rob Howard's site, as you mentioned, or a couple of sites, and Dave Ruver over in Asheville has got a couple of sites. And it's like, we got this land and all of it is like, if you want to put it at levels, it's level 5. It's got sewer, it's got electricity poles. It's like, I just need to kind of like get money to develop it, or, we're trying to figure out the next steps and we're going to use industrialized construction. 200, 300, 400 homes that could be built within a year, then that's just going to support getting people out of the tents or out of the hotels faster and getting them back into houses. And that's what you really want to see happen, is showcase how this can actually build quality housing quickly and get people out of their kind of temporary living situations that they've been forced into and back into like, more comfortable situations. They may not get back into their homes where they were living, but ideally they get close by and they don't lose that complete, they don't have a complete disconnect from the community that they were part of before.
Yeah, and there has been, right? I mean, the devastation can't be understated. We're on what's on the ground day one. You're cutting people out of vacation spots. Like, it started as a rainy weekend, and I think that's what most people don't realize, is that, the people that I came across on the 27th of September, the 28th of afternoon into the 28th of September, were people that were leaf peeping. They were coming up early fall to be in Western North Carolina to enjoy themselves. It was going to be a very soggy weekend, but people had said to me over and over again, we already paid for our Airbnb or VRBO, we paid for the rental. We were just going to grab an extra bottle of wine, and we just decided to come up and just have a long weekend anyway. So we had all kinds of tourists up there, completely unprepared, because there was a hurricane that was coming to Florida, and it was going to rain in the forecast. But when I got up there on the 20th, I have sensors all over our property in southwestern Virginia, and I was looking at soil saturation, and I was looking at rainfall, and I was looking at the total precipitation plus saturation of soil, and I saw it immediately. 2 days before, we were at 50%, which is full saturation. The reading is 50 on our soil sensors, and we had already had 8.5 inches of rain, and there was 11 more forecasts. I went down to the New River, and the New River was at bank 2 days, the day before the storm, before 11 more inches came. So I watched it go from full to 25 feet over to, discharges at 1 million gallons a second. And, the destruction, it was unbelievable. So it caught people off guard because we thought it was going to be a heavy rain event, and it turned out to be a catastrophic event. And one of the other groups that was at that meeting that you just mentioned was the USDA, because where I am in southwestern Virginia, it's rural and it's agricultural. And how much our food supply comes into this conversation has been completely missed in a lot of places. So let's talk about that for a second. We did have the USDA at that meeting. How important is their involvement in these discussions?
To be honest, that was a surprise attendee for us. We had been in part of a conversation about a week prior where we had kind of highlighted that this meeting was happening, and we had talked to, this larger group. I don't remember who put it on now, which is my mistake, but I think that, USDA was part of that conversation, and they heard about the meeting, and then they signed up to come with us. And it was great because, it just fit well. And they definitely brought a perspective that we feel we've been trying to highlight in relation to the tech hub that we've been building in this area, that, industrialized offsite construction doesn't have to just build multifamily stick frame homes in cities, right? You can use it to build single family houses, as Rob is doing and Dave Roover is doing, in rural or smaller towns or smaller communities just as easily if you build out the process, if you turn the process into a good product, as you said earlier. And that's exactly what ADL is trying to highlight, is that this works in cities, this works in rural communities. You just have to build out good products, and you have to ensure that the processes clearly are stated, and then you have to have that demand to really kind of ensure that the factories are kind of filled. Otherwise, you're going to have empty lines, which you don't want. But USDA came in and they were like, well, look, we've got funding to support rural communities in rebuilding efforts like this. So it's really just trying to figure out the best ways for them to engage. And that's where I think it was kind of very beneficial that they're present, that they're part of the conversation, and that they want to kind of find the best way to support home rebuilding and kind of rural redevelopment in this regard. And we're just showcasing that this is one option. It's what we think is probably a great option for kind of building long-term sustainability and resiliency in the communities, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the only option that we take on in terms of how we respond to this. I think that the FEMA stuff is so critical in early stage response, but if you really want to build long-term kind of disaster recovery efforts, you want to ensure that there's an economic component being built up at the same time. And that's where we see industrialized offsite construction as a good path forward for that.
Yeah. And, where we live, we've got animals that live too. And that's what sort of, double clicked on my mindset was pole barns, the silage and the hay that had been spoiled, the fencing stock that was gone, that took 60, 80 years to build up to create paddocks. The amount of destruction that happened in rural areas, in agrarian societies, agricultural societies, was they weren't worried about their homes. They were worried about their livestock. They were worried about their chickens. They were worried about their bees, because that is their dependency on the world, is that, right? Like, they have a regular job, but they were far more worried about the fact that they lost their pole barn and all their hay than they were that their house got a little muddy and wet. So it's amazing to me that, in talking about SIPs and mods and pods, right? there's skews there. If you have volumetric design and you have a factory that has, say, 8 lines or 40 stations, you can be building so many different things. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily need to just be a home, and it doesn't need to fit the American dream in terms of it being 3 bedrooms and 2 baths with a white picket fence. You can build anything in those factories, and that creates so much more resilience nationally for so many things in terms of national security. You can build things quickly, effectively, to specification with quality assurance. And that's what's got me so excited about it, is that it's a return to manufacturing. And we really can manufacture homes in a way that could potentially be more resilient and better quality than we're currently doing it through divisional scheduling.
Yeah. I think that, as I said before, like the USDA was a surprise visitor, and I was glad that they were there because they definitely brought in a conversation piece that was underrepresented, and it was like something that I didn't know how to address or how to deal with personally. And I think it's good also because the groups that showed up knew how to engage with them. Yourself, Madeline from Open Hearts, and I think that they live in these areas, they reside in these areas, and they were also like, look, we've got additional issues around kind of the property damage and livelihood damage that we need to deal with. So
Yeah, and you couldn't not hear over and over again that we have to talk about this through the lens of economic development, right? This is so much more than volumetric design and industrialized offsite construction. There's social programs that roll through these things. There's land planning and zoning that rolls through these things. There's urban planning that rolls through these things. Because you're talking about really creating resilient communities more so than just building houses. And that's the interesting thing for me, is that as an entrepreneur, through the development, you can create social opportunities for economic development and create resiliency in terms of our ability to respond to catastrophic events. So like all of that feels like a much better equation.
agreed. Yeah. I think that that's the kind of thesis that we continually hit on with cities is that the opportunity to kind of pull manufacturing facilities into the region and build on kind of the economic diversity of your workforce is going to be a huge a huge win for whatever city actually takes this on first, I feel, because if you get a city that's like, you know what, we're going to go full volumetric and we're going to create the demand for it, the factories are going to flock there, the entrepreneurs are going to flock there, the innovation is going to flock there because they want to like be part of something when you know that there's a demand in place for it to actually be built out. And it's going to help drive the ecosystem. It's going to, I feel, streamline the 100-year. The way that I kind of frame it sometimes is like if you look at the car industry and you look at the kind of like coalescence around a certain region. I mean, Detroit had all of these car manufacturers, and they had all of the suppliers for all those manufacturers around that area as well. And that was built out over 100 years. And basically, what we're trying to do is streamline the same kind of infrastructure, but for the housing industry. And there's so many components and pieces that go into it, as you said. But you can start with a full volumetric approach, but eventually you're going to break that down, and somebody's going to come along and say, "I can build these walls better," and they're going to set up a factory down the street, and they're going to just feed you walls. They're going to feed you these wall panels. So they're going to say, "I can build your bathroom pod so that all you have to do is construct it in 20 minutes. And it's going to be something quick and easy for 4 guys to put together." And that's going to be a way in which you can actually start to really kind of develop the supply chain for this manufacturing line, rather than a full volumetric, which I think is one approach to doing it. And you can actually build in a lot more robotics around that. But assemblies will happen much faster if you get all those components delivered in a finished form.
Yeah, that's the word I just wrote down, right? It's assemblies. It's not new. We've been doing, especially the car industry,
Totally.
but
Yep.
bringing in
Car industry, or like look at your iPhone. That iPhone isn't built all together in one factory, right? It gets 10,000 pieces shipped to the factory, and that factory just puts a robot and it puts it all in front of the robot, and the robot puts these things together down the line.
That's right. And when you turn that process into a product, and that then therefore becomes a technology, it brings price down. And that's the other thing
Exactly.
economically that we probably need to talk about a little bit. We sort of talked about, danced around the conversation around capital, the capital stack associated with the development. I use the word patient capital because I think that that's what we need right now. I think we need to, yes, the GPLP agreement around development and internal rate of return for the last 20 years looks very different than I think it does for the next 20. So can we talk about that a little bit? Because none of this happens without.
Yeah, I can't talk to it as fluidly as some of my team members, but I can, highlight that I feel that one of the ways in which factories need to receive support from the city around their operations is like, there's a lot of confusion over who owns, and this is partly, it's an insurance slash policy conversation, like who owns the boxes. Like when it's in the factory, it's clearly owned by the factory as they're building it out. And then once it leaves the factory, there's this questionable period where it's like in transit, or it's at a landing site or a staging area before it's getting stacked, and then it's getting stacked. Who's owning it then? So there's all these pieces I feel that are kind of this in between area. Whereas like if you're a GC and you're building, conventional construction, you're getting the material and you're building the thing up, and it's under your purview the entire time. But if you're a GC and you've kind of subcontracted this factory to do part of your work, all of a sudden there's this kind of like complicated layer around like ownership. And that's, I think, one thing that is, being worked out, but has to be discussed or a little bit more. But a lot of that comes down to like finances, because people want to fund things like a building, but they don't necessarily understand like if they're also funding the factory work or how that works. And then all of a sudden the factory needs a lot of the material up front because they're building in various stages. And so more money has to come from the financial provider earlier on, and ownership around that stuff needs to be cleared up. And as I said, like this isn't my kind of wheelhouse per se, but it sounds like you've done a lot of research into it. So I'd love to hear what you found out. And I also would say that there's a guy on my team, Owen, who's really looked heavily into this, and he just released a paper which I can share with you called the HUD 6700 paper. Was interested. It was commissioned by HUD for ADL to kind of like research and write a piece on how we actually start to address this financial component. And there's been groups thinking about this stuff for a while. Like Factory OS was really looking into that out on the West Coast for a long time, and trying to figure out the best way forward, working with financial institutions on how most effectively to bond a product and build this kind of new capital stack out to support industrialized offsite construction as a means to kind of building it out too. And I'll just highlight one other thing that that ADL has done recently, which is that they had a contract with the Navy just to help them rewrite their procurement process so that they could actually include modular construction as part of the procurement, because it currently didn't have very clear or articulated language. So now the Navy has the language necessary to procure housing or material in a modular format from manufacturers or developers as well. So that's, a shift in the way in which, even the Navy is starting to think a little bit more around how they can ensure that they can take advantage of these types of processes, and the faster process with the cheaper approach as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's why I think I try to dumb it capital, but the reality is it's a digital currency. It is what needs to happen. And we have distributed ledger technology right now. So when you're talking about chain of custody and provenance and who owns what at what time, you have to have a distributed ledger technology that allows you to sort of scan out and scan in. So the policies can effectively be activated and deactivated just in time. So if the factory has the SKUs and there's a QR code at the end, those SKUs go to a distributed ledger. They prove provenance. They prove chain of custody. It's no longer part of with us. It's now with the distributing the logistics company, the trucking company. The trucking company gets to the job site. They SKU again. That goes to another distributed ledger technology. And along with that, those are smart contracts. That's all they are. It's one smart contract.
Totally.
That at times of process continues to carry provenance to chain of custody. Those are distributed ledgers.
Which
that happens through
can carry on inside of a factory as well, right? I mean, that's like station to station also. So it's like the box moves down the line.
Where Wall Street is super excited about this is that there's a payment structure, right? Because
yeah.
You should get paid at that moment, right? If somebody signs off on something, why would we wait 30 days, invoice, send to accounts payable, accounts receivable, wait 30 days, get paid? If we want to speed up our economy, if we want to boost our economy, just like we talked about with having the job site prep work while you had offsite construction happening at the same time, we can make payment systems through distributed ledger technology. We can put policies in place according to risk management or payment systems that just auto pay. Everything gets automated. And that's not far off. The utility layer is already here. Tokenomics is already here. CDBCs is not the way to go. We've heard about that, but there is, the Trump administration came in and already created a new executive order around digital leadership. And it has to do with tokenomics. It has to do with what we're talking about here, because risk and financial payments need their moment in the sun if we're going to keep up economically.
Well, there's been a couple of supply chain logistics-based distributed ledger technology systems that have been created. Have you looked into them, or have you kind of like,
I have.
what have you
Yeah.
found? I'd be curious.
Well, I mean, so, most of what we've seen in the last 5 years is what they call layer 2 technology for blockchain, and it's gotten much smarter. And the logistics companies before were using things like near field, and they were using like Bluetooth, and they were using sensor technology. And then that sensor technology, eventually it wasn't persistent or interoperable enough. It would get to a point where it still went to Joe's clipboard. And that Joe's clipboard is where all of the information and energy dies, right? As soon as someone writes it down or prints it, it's dead. And the process would go only so far until you had a bill of lading. And that bill of lading was a piece of paper. So the process wasn't persistent and interoperable enough. And layer 2 technology for blockchain is really allowing for that, where you can program a smart contract through, and then you can require all the vendors to be compliant. Or it's like VHS and beta, right? We went through that whole period back in the 80s where we were trying to create standards. We have the distributed ledger technology now has layer 2 blockchain, and they can jump from chain to chain on the Lightning layer. So if you build out your technology, say on one layer, and I build out mine on another, we have the ability to jump from chain to chain to continue to carry that interoperability and persistence through the system. That's so far away from companies that are legacy linear companies. They wouldn't have an idea what we just said. So it's like getting to the point where context and understanding, especially with the advent of AI, if people think it's fast now, they're not going to recognize the amount of change that's going to happen in the next 4 years. And that's not a political statement. I really, truly believe that the 4 year, what's pushing this, the 4 year mark for me is my research on Bitcoin and how that's going to get to the end of the halving again. And we're going to have this crazy industry buy-in, industrial, we're going to see persistent interoperable systems because the utility behind blockchain. And I think it's here. I mean, it's in 30 days, the president has asked to see what the policies are. In 60 days, the group has been put together to look at those policies. In 180 days, the president has asked for recommendations on how to improve a digital economy. So we have 180 days. And our systems we need to be forward thinking in that, because that is the future. And it's that, to me, I believe, is really how you transition into a global economy, is you get virtual payment, chain of custody figured out, and risk management through smart contracts. The rest of it is just what we do for a living, whatever industry we're in.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how those technologies start to converge. And now that the US is really kind of like taking the approach of accelerating this tech with fewer guardrails, it seems like, how that, for better or for worse, accelerates forward. And, I think that there's a lot of great opportunity for us to really bring a lot of these industries that are very legacy into the 21st century in many ways through the utilization of distributed blockchain technology. AI is obviously very new still, but kind of taking over a lot of things really fast. And there's going to be a lot of growing pains around that. But the conversations around the distributed ledger and the manufacturing process has been quite a deep conversation for a while. I think that it's been part of the blockchain sphere for a long time. And it's interesting that it hasn't taken off already. I think that a lot of manufacturers are generally pretty lean. That's how they view their whole kind of like approach. The best ones do this. And I'm surprised that there aren't more that have just automatically adapted this type of technology. It's not a crazy technology to integrate, and you don't necessarily have to have a currency tied to it, but even just the tracking process around it that allows you for this third-party verification or trustless system that doesn't necessarily require another person to be part of it is I think, surprisingly confusing. It's confusing to me that it hasn't actually kind of like been embedded much more effectively already.
When I think that's our biggest opportunity is to create a blank canvas, looking at ERPs and looking at CRMs, your operating system, factory OS. Your factory OS needs to be composability equals interoperability plus persistence. And if it's not, then you've got the wrong supply chain, which means you have the wrong vendors. If they can't respond to that or fit in and be both compliant and adaptable to that workplace ERP or CRM, then you have a problem, right? It's when you get to proprietary systems that you run
Yeah.
into interoperability issues. Now you've got open APIs. Those APIs that are making calls and puts back and forth become dependencies. Now your procurement is dependent upon that API. You're like, oh, well, I mean, our system's connected to them. Like we've been doing business with them for 20 years. Well, that's not a
And
really
if that
good.
API goes down, then a lot of businesses are going to be shut down. That's what happened with the strike shutdown, right? What was it called? Was it called match strike or?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many of them.
Yeah, but some of them are very pervasive and you don't even know that they're operating on the back end. And if they go down, then all of a sudden massive components, like I think Southwest was shut down for like 2 days because of this API that just was non-functional for some reason for a short period of time.
And so I went straight back to school and I didn't understand two things that was really important for me to understand. One was I needed a better understanding of just computer science, just general computer science. And two, I needed a better understanding of data and data science. And I didn't understand those two things. I understood them sort of on the first layer level conversation, but I needed to go deeper. And now I
Yeah.
realize that just like so many of our legacy systems, technology has been built up like a Rube Goldberg puzzle. It's like I won't call it a house of cards, but it's pretty close. Proprietary systems with open APIs are not very well engineered. They can blow over in a minute, just like a poorly engineered physical structure. And there are better ways to create operating systems that are more secure. And that becomes supply chain conversation. That's factory OS. And I think that resilience inside of the operating system that deals with that operational complexity is arguably more important than what the factory is producing, because you can improve
Hmm.
what the factory is producing pretty quickly by bringing in lean or bringing in waterfall or bringing in any of these management practices, Six Sigma. Those are easy tweaks. The hard tweaks are the technology in the background that makes us move from process to product. People love the easy button, and there is nothing easy about the easy button.
Yeah. No, not at all.
So that's where the opportunity is as an entrepreneur that I see is the technology that supports the system that allows us to move from process to product. But I want that product to solve a bigger problem. It needs to solve societal problems. It needs to have purpose. It needs to be intentional. It needs to be circular. It needs to create value and benefit instead of just making money. Like I just feel like we need to move. Yes, everybody's gonna make money. That's part of economics. There's margin along this whole process. But if we can
Hmm.
somehow find a way to turn that process to product, hit the easy button for more people and multiply their ability to do more work, we're going to have a massive spike in economics. And what's bad about that?
Yeah. No, it'll be a great addition, I feel, and we'll see how it goes. But it'll be a great thing to ensure that that gets to be part of this kind of growth. And I feel like that was what we're still, I think, trying to figure out the best way to bring a lot of that technology into the work that we've been doing at the Tech Hub in Western North Carolina. I feel like there's the opportunity to attract manufacturers to the region to build houses, but not necessarily the technologists to the region. There isn't a huge innovation hub there. Ensuring that you don't lose sight of that component. I think that that's where we've always tried to ensure that there's a relationship with Charlotte and the Research Triangle Park area, because that's, I think, the way in which you can ensure that the kind of urban rural mix happens, and a lot of these great universities that are churning out brilliant kids with ideas that understand the technology in ways that I don't at this time. I would say we want to make sure that they're part of these conversations to layer these technologies in a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, so let's sort of finish the conversation around that. Like, what is next for WNCIC? What is next for the Tech Hub? Where are the listeners for the listeners? Where are we now, and what are the next 6 months to a year?
Yeah, so I think that the next 6 months to the year are kind of twofold. I would say one, we've had this kind of like expanded scope to try to figure out the best ways in which the resources that we've aggregated over the last year can be utilized effectively to respond to Helene in a much more kind of equitable and economically driven focus. We want to help build homes, and we want to help build an industry that builds homes to support the people that are in that area. Kind of longer term, we'll be wrapping up our strategy grant in the next couple of months, but there's a lot of people that are interested in kind of funding the continuance of this to start to do some pilot projects to maybe build out that catalog that actually supports the attraction for the region and the state broadly. And that's where we're at in terms of like trying to ensure that that happens while we complete our application for an implementation grant. So the EDA has this two-stage component where you become a designee for a Tech Hub, and then after you become a designee, you have to apply for this implementation grant, and that's anywhere from 25 to 45 million dollar implementation grant that takes over 10 years to really kind of build up the work that you're doing, and we'll be drafting and submitting that in the end of Q1 most likely, and then figuring out how we kind of go from there. But that process is, I think, twofold. It's going to take a while for the EDA to both kind of approve and start to distribute funds related to that, and two, who knows with the current environment if they're going to have the money to give it out, right? It's been appropriated actually by Congress already. So that component actually says that there's, I think, around $240 million that's going to be appropriated to this. And that was approved at the end of last year. But everything's changing on a daily basis right now. So it's unclear how all these components are going to play out over time.
Yes, we're seeing it too. Part of what I'm focused on with Pathways Communities is that foundation level and weaving in the social program access, digital equity, financial acuity, and upward mobility. That's one of the things that I'm trying to tackle the most, right? I think affordable housing has kind of been sort of hijacked in a lot of ways, the words and the concepts behind it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of trying to weave these sort of social programs into and create ownership, the sense of ownership, both physically, like literally and figuratively, so that people can participate in the upside of equity. Because I think that financial acuity and access to economics inside of affordable housing is really important. The first people that respond to these disasters are first responders and civil servants. You and I talked before a little bit about military service and purpose for our veterans or our returning
Mm-hmm.
service members when they come back. Pathways Communities creates that. Food and justice, looking at bringing food into these pathways communities is really important to me. And I'm not necessarily talking about people who are down and out. I'm talking about stabilizing civil service, nurses, first responders. When you call 911, I want the best firefighters in my community. I want the best police officers in my community. If I slip and fall, or if I get sick and I'm at the hospital, I want the best nurses. I want the best medical care. And right now, I feel like that missing middle is having to commute into urban centers from places that are more
Mm-hmm.
affordable. And that's just disconnected from the community, right? So what I've seen is that our foundation layer is what we're calling it. We've got exposure to all of these programs because that's really where we get into public-private partnerships. That's where our operating company starts to tackle social programming. It's not the property company that's developing the actual physical asset. That's a different business. That's a different entity. But that social programming around economic development is absolutely where I'm squarely focused. And it seems to be that we're just in a hurry up and wait kind of a situation, now that we've had an administration change. So, no, we don't know where that's going, but there's a really, really exciting side on the PropCo side because we've got development. We're talking about capital.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about moving a complex process to a product. I think where the challenge is going to be weaving in those social programming to create value and benefit around that community that you build, not just putting up an asset and moving on.
Yeah. There's probably quite a few models to look at in California, some of the affordable housing programs that they built there that, again, I agree with you that there's in many ways an unnecessary pejorative added to that term. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to just build more housing, which will make it more affordable. And there's like systems that are currently being used from HUD that are kind of helping to happen. But I think that we ultimately just need to build more housing and find out better ways to build it so that you can like not rely on those systems, but actually just build housing at an attainable rate, right? And then there are some great programs that have, I think, been developed. The ones I know of are in California. I'm sure they're across the US that integrate a lot of the kind of social welfare components that support people in like job growth and economic development that's necessary for certain groups that are getting off the streets or certain people that just need specific skills to be honed, and they kind of help with that kind of next steps and kind of getting into jobs or getting connected to the right people. So yeah, something that I think would be great to see in more places for sure.
Yeah, I see the ICP for us with pathways for customer profiling is that we've got 3 trails, 1 civil service, age in place is the second one, and workforce housing is the third. And those pathways communities have sort of different social programming associated with them, but not really. The cornerstone has to be access to digital equity. It's got to be built on upward mobility. So there's got to be value and benefit for there to be a progressive sort of concept behind living there. And then financial acuity. We're just so the American dream, the finances don't make sense right now. To stretch yourself to buy that first house, it does not financially make sense to do that. And that brings a lot of argument from people because it tends to be the number one way to create wealth is to build equity into your home. But when you overpay at the beginning and you've got inflation and you don't make enough money and your wage is not keeping up with that, maybe not the best idea. So look, we got a lot of problems to solve, and that's what entrepreneurship is, right? I always say that explorers use compasses, not maps. You have to have a direction. So thankfully we do, right? Industrialized offsite construction as part of economic development is super important. With where we are in relation to Western North Carolina and Helene relief, we already have a catalyst. We have a nexus. We have a massive need of 10,000 structures that are still gone, damaged. We have a governor that's already said we're going to make special circumstances associated with bringing housing to those affected areas. We have Virginia Tech. We have App State, 2 universities that are committed to it. We have ADL Ventures here. Like we have an amazing recipe of ingredients. We just have to make this menu serve. And that product has got to come across the line. And we have urgency. Like we cannot wait right now. There are people who are living in camper trailers today, blowing LPs of gas into their camper trailers to stay warm because they have nothing else. So like it doesn't get more dire than that. And FEMA relief is ending because it's time. And the housing certificates for the hotels are running out, and we have to start building. And we don't have the traditional general contractors or supply chains to do it. So sense of urgency is here. The nexus is here. The ingredients are here. Thank you for bringing all of this part together for that meeting. And we gotta get going. I don't know how to spark that anymore. We have all the ingredients we need. We've just got to get going.
I think that the Helene thing, for as disastrous as it was, will hopefully be that kind of foundational level that we can start to build on top of. And I'd love to see that work, and I'm excited to do that work with you.
Yeah, well,
see what happens.
Right, I'm going to plug App State's department, their DOE Energy Summit in June. So hopefully you can get back to the States in June. I don't know if you have any plans, but that's going to be a really good conference. NREL will be there, DOE's there. I'm sure a lot of the players that were in that same room that USDA will be there. So
absolutely.
Hopefully you're back. Let's stay close on this, Tim, and we're at an hour of time. Oh, I do have one more question. I think it's important to categorize people on the podcast. Do you best associate yourself as a maverick, a misfit, or a maestro?
I've never applied any of those terms to the stuff that I do, but I guess if I had to, I would probably take the first one, the Maverick. I think that misfit isn't necessarily my approach, and I definitely don't maestro things too often. So I'm going to kind of default myself into Maverick in terms of, my career has always been a little bit not non-traditional, if you will, and I've tried to figure out ways that I can be more supportive of community with the work that I do. So yeah, I would go with Maverick on this.
Awesome.
If I have to choose from those 3.
Yeah, no, and I know that they're broad and they don't generally sum people up holistically, but at the end of the day, what a meeting of the minds with the Mavericks, having a meeting of the minds
Yeah.
with Misfits, and having a meeting of the minds with Maestros. And I think my thesis is that, or my hypothesis is that we need all of them, and it just depends on sort of where you see yourself in the.
Well, I'd rather go to the Misfits meeting if that's going to be happening.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
I
would be
think that they'd be having the most fun.
so yeah, no, you've already picked. You're a Maverick, man.
Yeah, I guess.
I'll send
Go to
video.
war.
How can people reach you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, so I assume you'll share this. I'll kind of repost it on LinkedIn as well because I'd like to get this out there. And then Tim Nichols at ADLVentures.com. Reach out. I'm working with a lot of different cities on trying to figure out their approaches to industrialized construction and affordable housing, or working with housing authorities in various regions. And I'd love to support other cities as well. So that's
Yeah, thank you for sharing your time with us and sharing the space with us, Tim. I'll put that in the liner notes. It'll be on YouTube and Spotify.
appreciate it.
Yes, we will push it for sure once we get.
Chris, I appreciate what you're doing. You're doing a lot of great work out there, and I think that it's going to be exciting to work with you more on the stuff that's coming up. So
Yeah, lots ahead. Thank you for your time, Tim. We appreciate you, pal.
take care, Chris.
Cool, man. That was awesome. Your little thing should upload there before you hang up. It's got about 20 seconds, it says.
But yeah, that time is climbing though. Yeah, I've had some, I just hope my connectivity issues weren't too bad. I wasn't